few days back, I talked about the shutdown of Volition, the developers behind Saints Row, who recently released a Saints Row entry that was very negatively received near universally. I talked about all of that in a video titled Saints Row Tanked So Badly That Publisher Embracer Shut Down the Development Studio Volition. In that video, I talked all about its middling Metascore and the poor user score, both on Metacritic and on Steam alike. I talked about the fact that not many people bought this game or are playing this game. I talked about how many units this game had to sell to break even. According to analysts, it must sell 2 million units, but despite the optimisms from the CEO who said that he believes the game will make money, ultimately because of how much this game cost to make and how little revenue it generated because of a lack of interest surrounding a game that was just poorly conceived and poorly executed. It led to big losses for the publisher. And while back then Embracer insisted that they would not close Volition or put the Saints Row franchise on ice, that very quickly changed when Volition was, in fact, shut down just a couple days ago. Announced via the following LinkedIn post that reads more like Embracer wrote this statement rather than Volition developers proper, because of the way they kind of try to make this seem like it's a good thing for Embracer. There's all to strengthen Embracer and maintain its position as a leader in the video game industry, yada, yada, yada. And Volition, having been such a long-running video game company with a 30-year history whose projects range from the Descent series to Free Space to Red Faction to Saints Row, this was definitely something that hit a lot of gamers, especially those who grew up gaming in the 90s and in the early 2000s, pretty hard. Now, since the shutdown, Volition did take the time to write this statement and publish it on social media outlets like Twitter, and this is what that reads like. I'm not going to read all of this. There's nothing in the way of new information offered. It's just Volition kind of expressing their gratitude for 30 years of support from fans and just kind of saying in a heartfelt way that through their ups and downs, everything they did was for the fans and their enthusiasm for the various game series that they developed and represented. And so, this feels more like something that was actually written by Volition, whereas this right here, this statement from LinkedIn, feels more like corporate PR. Now, Deep Silver, who is the publisher of Saints Row and who is also a subsidiary of Embracer, kind of put out this brief statement where they said, "Our thoughts go out to everyone at Volition, past and present. We're incredibly grateful for their unforgettable work on Saints Row and Red Faction, whose IPs will live on at PlayOn." PlayOn, for those who don't know, was formerly known as Coach Media before it was renamed to PlayOn when the company was acquired by Embracer Group in February of 2018. Now, on one hand, one can interpret Deep Silver saying that these IPs, Red Faction and Saints Row, will live on as them considering making more games for these series. But on the other hand, it could just mean that these IPs will technically exist in the sense that Deep Silver and in turn Embracer will have ownership over them, but that doesn't necessarily mean that substantial new AAA games will be made from them, especially because Saints Row has proven to be such a risky proposition for Embracer given how much money it lost the company. But that's in large part to do with the fact that because of how poorly Saints Row, the reboot, was conceived and executed, it was just not a product that was compelling for the masses. Saints Row had an uphill battle as it was because the Saints Row IP is more niche, and they really had to blow it out of the water and really nail it for them to bring back Saints Row in a big way as essentially like a parody to Grand Theft Auto, just much more outlandish in numerous regards. And there was a way to make that work, I think. They just actually had to ship a good game that was well marketed and well executed, and they failed on all of those fronts. So while I hope that one day Saints Row can be revived and be given to a development studio who can do, I guess, another reboot justice, to me, when they say these IPs will live on, all that means is I think that they'll be on life support. They'll be technically alive, but they won't be living. Like, I don't get the sense we'll see a new Saints Row anytime soon after how badly the previous Saints Row, the rebooted Saints Row, flopped, given all of the negative PR surrounding the IP currently, and given that Embracer as a publisher is not doing so hot after a $2 billion deal with Saudi Arabia fell through, after recent financial briefings showed less than ideal results, in no small part because Saints Row flopped so badly and the budget for that was so huge. Now, one of the big questions that people are asking is just what exactly went wrong with Saints Row Reboot? How could it have shipped in such a state And why was it so tonally dissonant from what Saints Row originally was? Saints Row was always about gangs, but then this new Saints Row reboot was all very like hippie and all about like, I don't know, like friendship and stuff. And turns out there might be a reason behind why that direction was taken. It might have something to do with publisher interference, or at least that's based on what YouTuber Flippy has reported in this video titled "Volition is Dead." Flippy is somebody who is a major part of the Saints Row scene, of the Saints Row community, and he's also a contributor to the Saints Row 2 patch and has worked on that. This is a patch that was officially announced back in October of 2019, whose goal is to improve performance, fix bugs, improve draw distance, improve audio quality, and just implement various enhancements, as well as all DLCs from the console version, as well as restore online co-op and multiplayer through Steamworks integration. This was something that was being directly handled by Volition, and this was something that a lot of Saints Row fans were looking forward to. And now even the status of this patch is called into question now that Volition has been dissolved. He's somebody who's pretty involved in the Saints Row franchise and has kept his ears close to the floors and walls about the goings-ons of this IP. And something that he reports in this video is that many of the poor conceptualizations behind Saints Row, especially where its tone is concerned, had to do with Deep Silver, the publisher, wanting the game to lean in this direction. He stated in this video that in the early days of Saints Row, when Volition was still conceptualizing the game, the reboot for Saints Row, the thought process that they had was that they essentially wanted to make a Saints Row 2.5. They wanted to use Saints Row 2 as the foundation and just kind of make it a better version of what made that game special and bring all of the best elements of Saints Row 2 and just modernize all of that and just make the next Saints Row 2, essentially, which honestly for Saints Row fans would have been a dream come true because so many fans just love Saints Row 2. It feels like the blueprint for what Saints Row should be. Instead, Deep Silver thought, well, I don't think that's going to appeal to a lot of people, so what we want to do is shift the direction of the Saints Row reboot to be more about friendship and companionship and have something more upbeat and with a more wholesome side to it. And that's apparently where things start to go wrong, at least on a narrative conceptual level. And that's why we got a story that was so cringe and a direction that felt so very unlike Saints Row. Here's website Twisted Voxel that summarizes what that video talked about, stating here that originally Volition had planned to make a Saints Row 2.5 in tone for the reboot, but publisher Deep Silver intervened and said that it would not be a commercial success, which is utterly insane to me. They continued instead, they steered the game in a different direction by insisting on having the game take on a more upbeat tone with a storyline involving a group of friends. Well, how'd that go, Deep Silver? Did that prove to be commercially successful? Did your master plan end up working out? The YouTuber insisted that Deep Silver ultimately called the shots regarding the direction that its IP would take. Volition wanted the game's narrative to focus on gang warfare, which is a given. It's the identity of Saints Row, but obviously with more outlandish and absurd elements that give Saints Row that unique identity, but the publisher wanted the subject matter to be more about friendship. And while Flippy does call out Volition for things like how they shoehorned the awful combat system, essentially kind of reusing the dated gameplay of old Saints Row games instead of trying to modernize it a lot more, and he didn't completely put Volition off the hook. You know, the developers were responsible for just the bland mission designs. They were responsible for the janky gameplay and all of these things. On the other hand, one could argue that maybe the publishers just didn't give the developers enough time to realize their ambitions and enough resources. But at the same time, it seemed like Volition had the right idea in terms of the kind of game that the Saints Row reboot needed to be, and publisher interference might have potentially led to that being led astray. And honestly, there's nothing more demotivating than you having this awesome idea for a project and then being told by a higher up that you need to make it into something that you don't want to make it into. And so I feel like that's probably very demotivating for the team when they're working on something that they know isn't what they really wanted to make. And so that doesn't help with getting the best out of, the development team. While Volition might have some of the blame to carry because of the way they might have gone about developing the Saints Row reboot, the larger share of the blame, says this YouTuber, goes to Deep Silver for setting a tone that the series had never been known for, and so it kind of doomed this game from the start. Even if the final game had been janky, if at least it had some of the identity of Saints Row, maybe it would have appealed to the fans enough where it might have sold more copies or just done more successfully, just done a little better than the utter flop and disaster that it was. But alas, the end results speak for themselves when corporate interference happens from people from higher-ups who have no idea what makes these artistic endeavors special. Instead, they focus on what they think will make money. But when you think that way, you actually are shooting yourself in the foot, because when it comes to video games, what matters is that the games are fun and that word of mouth spreads about how fun they are, and you can't artificially create that. Fun has to come from the heart of the creators, especially in the realm of game development. And so when you let developers have fun developing a game that they themselves want to play, that they themselves want to make because they know that everyone else, or at least people who partake in this IP or this genre, want to play, then you get something really fun and really special, as long as, things go smoothly in the development process. But when that kind of corporate interference happens, where suits who don't understand the fan base, who don't understand the appeal of the IP, and are only looking at things in terms of money and numbers, when these kinds of entities interfere, we get some of those baffling AAA game releases like Saints Row. And this is kind of what Flippy had to say in his video about this whole situation, based on what he knows and what he's heard.
Volition wanted the reboot to be about gangs. Some of us in the core community were personally told early on that they were setting out to make Saints Row 2.5. But Deep Silver stepped in and said, no, that kind of subject matter doesn't sell games. Water it all down and make it about friendship. There's so much to be said about that, I'm only scratching the surface.
So yeah, Flippy might have a lot of insider knowledge that he just isn't sharing, at least not yet. But I mean, if this is true, and the thing is, Flippy doesn't talk about what his sources are and all these things, but he is trusted enough by the Saints Row community where his words definitely do carry a lot of weight. And if all of this is true, what he's saying is true, then the publisher definitely had a large part to play in the ruination of what could have been a great comeback for Saints Row, with a reboot that would have kind of taken inspiration from a source material that fans of the series are very fond of. And so this is tragic, and let this serve as a lesson to the suits, who make these kinds of decisions and who think they know better about franchises and IPs that they're not fans of, like genuinely fans of, and take joy in, but are only looking at these IPs in terms of how much money can they bring us. Let the creatives kind of take care of that for you. If you want money, then the product itself, the game, has to shine in its own right by understanding its audience, by understanding what it is, what the IP is in its identity. And it felt like Volition had that before they lost it to corporate interference, when Saints Row became, whatever the hell it turned out to be with the reboot, which many people just don't recognize as Saints Row, especially in its tone and narrative. But also, its lack of polish, its lack of quality, its lack of substantial content. It just felt like such a bare bones, broken, and poorly conceived game that it's clear that a lot of things went wrong behind the scenes, and it looks like things started to go wrong from the outset when that shift in direction happened because of corporate interference, at least according to what Flippy seems to be recording, assuming what he's saying is true. Again, nothing is 100% confirmed, but it wouldn't shock me if there's truth to what Flippy is saying, because we've seen it happen so many times with other games that saw baffling end results, or end results that were corrupted from their original concept, or you can tell that the corporate money grubbing influence aspects of the game design and aspects of the direction, when that has such a drastic effect on a project that it can lead to something like the Saints Row reboot and all of its misgivings. It's impossible not to feel really disappointed and not to wonder about what could have been had the original direction and the original vision of the game been maintained. But alas, that's for, I guess, another parallel timeline, another universe. But this is the update that I wanted to provide about the volition situation, the new statement that they provided, and some interesting new tidbits of information from somebody who might have insider knowledge about a game that people were cheering for it to be the big comeback for an IP that had been dormant for far too long, only for it to be the final nail in its coffin. That's one man's take, and this is kind of the information that I wanted to share with you guys. Let me know in the comments below what your thoughts and opinions are on the information that Flippy shared, the current state of Saints Row and Embracer as a publisher, and what you think the future holds. Only time will tell, but share your thoughts in the comments below, and to be further updated on all things gaming news, reviews, and discussions, stay tuned right here on Young Yeah. I'll see you guys next time. Young out.